It is a pleasure to me to introduce John L. Allen Jr. John Allen is the prize-winning senior correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter and senior Vatican analyst for CNN.
Because the subject we are here to talk about today is the global war on Christians. And of course, we are in campaign season in 2012. Is this not working? Oop. We are in campaign season in the United States in 2012. And of course, you are aware there is a lot of talk in the political air these days on talk shows and pundits and so forth about whether or not there is a war on religion afoot in American society in our time. Now look, I have no intention of taking a position on that question. There are strong views, compelling views on both sides. What I am here to tell you today is that the most dramatic Christian story of our time is that there is a completely non-metaphorical war on religion, and more specifically, war on Christianity, afoot in a growing number of places in the world. Let me put it to you this way, ladies and gentlemen. In the United States, a threat to your religious freedom means that you might get sued. In a growing number of other parts of the world, it means that you might get shot. And I hope that we can all agree that that should rate slightly higher on the urgency meter. In fact, I would suggest to you that the most compelling and most urgent Christian story of our time is that in the early 21st century, we are witnessing the rise of an entire new generation of Christian martyrs, women and men all around this world of ours who are paying in blood for their fidelity to the gospel and to the faith. The picture that we had on the slide a moment ago was a group of those new martyrs. These are the victims of the siege of Our Lady of Salvation, Chaldean Catholic Church in Baghdad on October 31st, 2010. We'll come back to that in a moment. But let me give you a sense of our game plan here today. I am first going to give you an overview of this global war on Christians and Christianity, some of the facts and figures that give flesh to this story. I'm then going to give you 4 dispatches from the front lines, 4 parts of the world where you see this war being waged. And I'm then going to try to debunk 5 common myths about anti-Christian violence and persecution. And then we'll end with a final thought and we'll be done. Okay? So first, let me give you the overview. Oh, sorry, before we get to that, let me make this note. In addition to being the most compelling and urgent story of our time, I think this is also the most untold Christian story of our time. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is the one indicated on this slide. This is a quote from a French intellectual by the name of Régis Debray, who is a veteran leftist. He fought alongside Che Guevara in Bolivia. And Debray makes the point, which I think is spot on, that violence against Christians tends to fall into the ideological blind spot of the West. That is, the victims of this violence tend to be too Christian to interest the political left, and they tend to be too foreign, too exotic to interest the political right. However, I think there is an even more basic reason that this story goes untold, which is that in the West, we are so accustomed to thinking of Christianity as a socially dominant majority that getting our minds around the fact that in many places of the world it is a persecuted and aggrieved and beleaguered minority is a kind of psychological stretch. But ladies and gentlemen, it is a psychological stretch that is long overdue, and I hope today's presentation will help sort of push us down that path. All right, first, the overview. Here's the first statistic, and it is a staggering statistic, that 80% of all acts of religious discrimination and persecution in the world today are directed against Christians. It is a fact, ladies and gentlemen, not a hunch, not a theory, not a product of an overheated Christian imagination, but it is an ironclad empirical certainty that in today's world, Christians are by far, by some order of magnitude, the most persecuted religious body on the planet. And this statistic documents it. And by the way, this statistic comes from the International Society for Human Rights in Frankfurt, Germany. This is a secular NGO that monitors human rights issues, so it's not a church source. It is an independent, secular human rights observatory that monitors religious persecution all over the world, and they have concluded on the basis of decades of experience of tracking these issues, 80% of all acts of religious persecution are directed against Christians. Second fact, according to the Pew Forum, which again is the most widely regarded secular think tank on religion and public policy based in Washington, it is a fact that Christians face persecution in 133 nations around the world, which is 2/3 of the total number of nations on the face of the planet. Now, in some cases, this harassment and discrimination is de jure. That is, it's an article of the law of the place. If you want an example, I would give you Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, it is a fundamental cornerstone that the constitution of the country is the Quran, that is the Islamic scriptures, and that any non-Islamic form of religious expression, to be more precise, non-Wahhabi Muslim form of religious expression is prohibited, which means that Christians cannot wear crosses, they cannot import Bibles, they cannot gather for worship either in public or private without the threat of harassment by the religious secret police. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, lest you think that the Christians in Saudi Arabia are such a small minority, this doesn't add up to very much. It is a fact that today there are more than 1 million Catholics, not Christians to court, but 1 million Catholics in Saudi Arabia. Now, these are largely not Saudi nationals. These are expat Filipinos and Koreans and Vietnamese and Lebanese and Nigerians who are working in the oil industries and in the domestic service industries. But there's more than 1 million of them. And in the circumstances I've just described, it is absolutely impossible to conduct routine pastoral life. Now, in other countries, the discrimination is not de jure. That is, legally, the law of the land guarantees religious freedom, but it isn't necessarily respected on the ground. Indonesia would be an example, the world's largest Muslim nation, where the Constitution enshrines religious freedom as a principle of constitutional law. But nevertheless, in a growing number of parts of the country, a rising tide of Islamic radicalism is putting Christians in harm's way. You add all that up, what you get is 133 nations in which Christians are at risk. Now, here, in my opinion, is the most dramatic statistic. Comes from Aid to the Church in Need, which is a widely respected Catholic humanitarian agency based in Europe. Their estimate is that every year in this world someplace, 150,000 Christians are killed for religious motives, either out of explicit hatred of the faith or hatred of works of charity motivated by the faith. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that in the hour and a half we are going to be together here this afternoon, somewhere in this world, 25 Christians are being killed, are paying in blood for their fidelity and for their faith. 25 people are dying in merely the amount of time we are going to be here together this afternoon. If that is not enough to convince you that this is an enormously compelling and urgently important Christian issue of our time, I'm not sure what would do the trick. Now, what this all adds up to, in my opinion, is that the defense of religious freedom is going to be the towering, front burner, get out of bed in the morning thinking about it issue facing global Christianity in our time. And you see the thesis statement on the slide. I am profoundly convinced that the defense of religious freedom is destined to be the premier social and political concern of the Catholic Church in the 21st century. The premier social and political concern.